Good evening, members. As this is the first meeting of this committee, I will wish you all a Happy New Year. I'm not sure at what stage of the month we stop saying that, but Happy New Year to you all. This is the meeting of the Stronger Council Select Committee. It's Tuesday the 24th of January 2023, and I'd like to remind all members present at this meeting that it will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing or another such use by third parties. And if you are seated in the lower public seating area, it is likely that the recording cameras will capture your image, and this will result in a possibility that your image will become part of the broadcast. This may infringe your human and data protection rights, and if you wish to avoid this, you should move to the upper public gallery. Apologies for absence.
Yes, Chairman, we have apologies from Councillors Bassett and Morgan.
Thank you. Any other apologies? Okay, item 3, substitute members.
No substitute members, Chairman.
Thank you. And members, item 4, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest members would like to declare? None? Thank you. So then we go to item 5, which is pages 5 to 12 of your agenda report pack, to agree the notes of the previous meeting on the 24th of November. Are members happy with those minutes? I take that as agreed. Yep, thank you. So now we have item 7, which is the onboarding induction, which is pages 17 to 24 on your agenda pack. Sorry, item 6. I do apologise. Item 6, which is our terms of reference and work programme, that's located on pages 13 to 16. Has any members got anything to query on our work programme? Anything I'd like to add? No? None at all? Okay, so then we will go to item 7, which is our onboarding induction, which is pages 17 to 24 in our report pack. We have a presentation on this item tonight, so I will hand over to officers.
Good evening. So the report around onboarding provided to the committee outlines the work that the people team are currently carrying out to improve the applicant experience, and will showcase that system and that platform to you this evening. The current labour market, candidates are looking very closely at organisations, and we need to stay competitive as a council to ensure that the start of the candidates recruitment process with us is a positive and engaging experience. The report outlines a full introduction into the report, the opportunities for good onboarding that organisations need to offer, our journey of onboarding and current onboarding at EFDC, the future of onboarding at EFDC, and I'm going to hand over to Andy now, who's going to take you through a live system demo.
Hi everyone. So the onboarding platform we've got is through our HR payroll system, and it's a module within that. I've just got a test person here that I was going to show you very quickly. So they log in using their same details they would have used to apply for a job here at Epping. And the first bit they get is a little privacy statement, which they scroll down to. Obviously I've read that and accepted it. And the first screen we get within the onboarding module is the job offer screen. It tells the candidate a little bit about the onboarding system, what they need to do, what they can look at, a little bit about the job that they've been offered, and a little bit about the benefits, a little bit more about perk box, and within that there's a video they can click on and find out a little bit more about that. And about staff parking as well, because that's often something that people ask about when they're coming to work for us. At the end, they've got a job offer confirmation, so we would have sent their contract and all their contractual details over an email. And again, you will notice in the report about enhancements to the system at future dates. We are looking to build that out a little bit more. At the moment, they're going to accept job offer. And they'll be provided their dashboard homepage. On here, they've got a checklist, some first day information. They can pre-book some holiday if they've got some before they start. On the left-hand side here, we've got a menu for getting to know us. On here, we've got some links into various elements of the council website where they can go and have a look a little bit more about what we do and how we work. This particular job's for a job in HR or a people team. So we've got Joe as the manager, and the candidate can have a look at who's within their team. We're slowly building out some of the items here. So we've got a little bit around the corporate plan, values and behaviours within the organisation. And then we've picked out some key employees and contacts within the organisation so they can see who they might meet within their first few days. Back on the dashboard, they can go back to the job offer page that we saw at the beginning. They've got another link into the pre-book holiday. They can actually look at the organisational chart, which is also available to employees within employee self-service. And this will default to the position that they've been offered within the structure. And they can actually scroll around that if they wanted to, as an employee would. And as I say, they've got this first day area as well. So if they click on the first day, there's some more information. We've got their start time in there. We've got a civic tour, which has actually got the embedded virtual 3D tour that was created a couple of years ago. And a few more sort of interesting things they might need to know when they come work at the civic, about booking spaces, taking breaks, where the conference suite and things, and how to actually enter into the civic. And we've got some more interesting things that they might want to know. They're sort of snippets, really, because actually they're not necessarily going to remember everything on the run-up to their start date, but it's just to give them a flavour, reduce the anxiety levels. It's got around work buddies, the self-service system that we use, payroll, using Microsoft Teams, My Permit, the Chief Exec and Power Hour, Litmus, and DSE, display screen equipment. As I mentioned earlier, within this dashboard, there's also a checklist, and we're slowly building this out. Some of the items within this will be pre-filled when they fill in their job application form, as it will all move across the system as they become an employee. But they can actually go into elements of this and update various information. And in here we've got personal information, national insurance number, address, contact information, emergency contacts and next of kin, and monitoring information as well. So there's lots of bits in there that they can fill out as they go through the process. And that's a sort of a whistle-stop tour of our onboarding platform. As I say, in the report there is potential for more enhancements within this, and we're working closely with the supplier to sort of build that out a little bit more moving forward. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, and thank you very much for that report. Members, questions? I'll start with Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Chair. Looks very good. Are there any plans for it to be extended to councillors? Because I think they might be quite useful for us.
I hadn't got that on my agenda, but it certainly could be utilised for members. The system works on templates, and you could certainly create a member template with some information on there. So it is definitely possible.
Yeah.
We have got plans, though, to host a member induction as part of that platform, so to really get our candidates that are coming into the council to understand the member role.
Thank you. It's a very good question. Councillor Whitehouse.
Yeah, I'm pleased to see it's part of the existing HR system and not another system which needs to hold data which is separate from other systems. So two things, really. I mean, this is a large, not massively large organisation, and I'm just wondering, there's a danger that when you route everything through forms and internet, you actually lose, the personal touch of, a phone call from the manager or welcome, or the personal relationships which are built up from the start. So I just wondered if you could say something about how we make sure that we're not routing everything through sort of remote keyboard entry. I mean, the other thing is, at what point does it cover things like, I mean, if you're a budget holder, we've got financial regulations and procurement rules and things that you need to know about. Is that, obviously that's something you need to do in work time, not before you join work. But is that sort of training, onboarding, induction, recorded through this as well?
Okay, in terms of the first question, yeah, sorry, I've forgotten what the question was. Personal touch, thank you. So, yeah, in terms of the personal touch, alongside this is a manager's guide for onboarding and induction as well. And within that contains a number of sort of step points, touch points to make contact with the person, just make sure they're okay, make sure that, you know, they are okay to start on the agreed start date. They might need to push it back or something like that. So there's a number of those in there, as well as to help guide the manager to remember all the things that they need to do. You know, things like setting up IT equipment and such like. So yeah, so there is those still in there. This was built really to try and remove some of the manual forms that we send on an email out to the person, sort of try and embed it within the system so we don't then have to dual key that information again. So yeah, so that's what that's for. I'll let Joe, did you want to answer that? Yeah.
So the plan for this is it actually enhances those relationships because it removes all of the manual administration from the process, and there is an awful lot of admin that goes with recruiting an individual and onboarding an individual, but it will enhance that relationship piece because we'll be able to concentrate on that because all of that bit will be done as that pre-onboarding and on the onboarding platform.
I think Andrew would like to come in here as well.
If I may just add, Chair, yes, I think we are conscious about the personal element of it as well. So Georgina, the Chief Executive, or myself, or both of us, and Jen will meet all new starters as well into the organisation. We try to get them together periodically for an induction lunchtime meeting, so where we say hello and understand more about where people have come from and their journeys, and to explain a bit more about the organisation and any questions, answer any questions that they might have about the council and its operation and its political structure and members that we work with as well.
Thank you, and I completely agree that the personal touch is very important. It can be lost through technology, but if more time is being made available to do that, then hopefully that is a positive outcome. We'll go to Councillor Patel and then I'll be to Councillor Brooks.
Hi, that was really good onboarding session. But my question is more about, so I was a bit confused. So when I first looked at it, it also gives people an option of saying, accept the job offer at that time as well. But, okay, so it's not once they've got a job that they've got to go to this website and then they can look through things. Okay, so in that case, one, is this restricted to people that would... Well, information-wise, are we worried that there's more information on there that only a person who's got the job should have, or is it filtered? Yeah, go on.
Oh yeah. So this will kick in at the point where we've sent a contract. So we've done all the pre-employment vetting, the references and stuff. In theory, the manager would have agreed the start date with them, so we could draft the contract because the start date would go on there. And then we would send them out this. So it will be the period, because a lot of people won't tend to hand their notice in until they've actually got a physical contract in their hand. So this will kick in at that point. We send the contract and then they go in. So we have offered the role. All the stuff that they've got in there will be either stuff they've filled in on their application form or additional stuff that we need to help them set up, or things that they just could do with knowing before they start, really. The sort of things that you'd probably get a little bit anxious about, you know, sort of where do I go, how do I get into the building, those sorts of things.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up question in that case. So will there be a different login details for them when they accept the job, and then there's a whole set of priority prioritised documents to fill out, etc.? Will they get that kind of list that fill these out as a priority, and then maybe day 2 has something else?
Yeah, so in terms of the user account, it will be the same user account they use to apply for the job, so there won't be a different user account, it will be the same one. They do then get a new user account when they're becoming an employee, because they'll have a payroll number and everything at that point. So, and their email address will switch to an EFDC email address. So yeah, so in terms of that, that's what will happen.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Brooks.
I think particularly in an era where most people are likely to be working hybridly, I think the personal touch is really important. So I'm really pleased to hear that Jen or some other senior person actually meets people physically. One is a question really to do with it. Well, partly to do with it. Do we just selectively DBS check, or is everyone DBS checked?
So DBS check is based on the role that someone does, and the Disclosure and Barring Service have a number of criteria you need to meet. So either have an enhanced or standard check, so it does depend on the role. We wouldn't DBS check everyone by default.
Any other members? I do just have a couple of questions before we move on. Thank you for your presentation. I welcome the online welcome that we give people that join our organisation. I think it's great. It's almost like they know where they're working. What you learn in your first week you can do on the week before you actually walk into the building. So I think that's really can only be good for productivity. It was actually a question about the feedback that we've received. It was the 11% of employees that didn't get the proper, or didn't feel they knew where the proper information was. Do we know what particular information they felt they didn't have or couldn't easily access? And if so, has that been made extra clear on this particular portal? And my other question was, when new starters give feedback, which they are all often asked to, it would be understandable as a new starter trying to make an impression. You may not be extremely honest with something that you might think could be improved. You may wait a few months until your feet are under the desk, or perhaps your probationary period is over before you then start to be extremely transparent with your feedback. So I just wondered how often we do ask those questions and get the feedback from new starters.
So I can answer the question around new starters and their feedback. So within the onboarding and induction process, we run what we call HRBP power hours, where we invite all new starters into the Civic to meet us, and we answer any specific questions that they've got or niggles that they've got, and that goes across the whole plethora really of things like systems, policies, how easy was it to access the building, did someone walk you around? So we cover a lot of angles in that piece, so, and every new starter goes through that.
In terms of the 11% mentioned in the report, that was an industry benchmark type figure. But I guess in terms of the system, there's a lot of more enhancements we can do. We've got surveys and questionnaire options moving forward that we want to look at, which actually will help towards getting that feedback, and having things like the onboarding platform will help get people used to filling in those things so that actually we can get some meaningful feedback, as well as the stuff that we get through the HRBP power hours at present, because actually we do get a lot of feedback through those, which both, you know, stuff to work on and really positive, so it's good.
Thank you, and I guess ultimately with the new ways of working now, we can actually look at how other organisations are doing this and learn from new starters who will share feedback from their previous companies or authorities. So that's really, really good to hear. So thank you, and thank you for your presentation. Any other questions from members before we move on to the next item? Okay, so our next item is the item 8, which is the launch of the Employee Wellbeing Hub. This is pages 25 to 32 on the agenda report sheet, and I understand you're going to be taking us through that presentation as well. Thank you.
Okay, so the report around wellbeing highlights to the committee, it's an update around the developments of our wellbeing offering at EFDC, and also our wellbeing hub, and the resources which we'll showcase to you tonight. The report outlines our wellbeing journey so far, some of the challenges that we're facing at the moment, our new and improved wellbeing hub, which Sarah will take you through and give you a live demo, and then we'll ask for any questions. Thank you.
Any questions? Oh, sorry.
So I'm just going to take you through a demo, if that's okay. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Chairman. So on the screen at the moment, you'll be able to see our wellbeing hub, the new improved look. So employees will access this via the employee intranet. They'll just click on a link and they'll go straight to this page. So part of the challenges that we outlined in the report was actually that prior to having this, we had no real categorisation of our wellbeing resources. We kind of just had a web page that listed everything. So we've in the bottom right hand corner you can see we've got 6 different categories for our wellbeing resources now. So it just makes things a bit easier for people to navigate and hopefully doesn't lead to that feeling of overwhelm and trying to find the information that you need. So on the bottom left hand corner we've got an introduction from Joanne Budden, and eventually that will be replaced with an embedded video which we're working on at the moment. So as I mentioned, we've got a section for mental wellbeing, physical wellbeing, financial wellbeing, winter wellbeing, family support and work-life balance. So I'll just quickly whiz you through each of the pages just to show you what it looks like and how to use the document. So at any point in time you can either scroll through the document using these arrows, go back to home, and you go back to that same home page we were just on, and yeah, it's just a bit of an easier way of navigating it. So first resource we've got down here is the Employee Assistance Programme with Health Assured, which entitles employees to 4 free counselling sessions. So as you can see when you click on the box, it takes you to some further information, a link to the actual resource and a video that you can play within it. Down here we've got our mental health first aiders, so when you click on this link it takes you to a list of all of those employees and some further information about them. So I believe we've trained around 90 mental health first aiders, across the organisation to date. So we've got a really healthy number of people that people can access. Links to mindfulness and meditation, best tips for improving your mental health, and urgent support. Now these link straight off to the Mental Health Foundation website with some further information. And actually trauma cards up here is actually a recent news release that we sent out to employees about trauma cards, which is really helpful. So the next page is physical wellbeing, and we highlight all sorts of different resources, including the Cycle to Work scheme, Places Leisure discount for employees, Perkbox Medical, the Wellness Hub, which has all sorts of resources for exercises and all sorts on there, menopause and other resources. Our next page is financial wellbeing. Now this is something that we introduced in October or November this year in response to what was going on across the country. So we've got a brand new skill pill learning pathway on Litmus, which is our online learning software. So we've got that there, Perkbox discounts, and all sorts of other things, including a link to the Epping Forest Community Hub information, because some of our employees are residents as well, and some of those resources might be helpful for them too. The next page is winter wellbeing. So this is the page that we see as being the most probably we'll change it seasonally, if that makes sense, so according to what's going on at the time. Just some more information down here, and I'll just quickly demo this. So we've got a picture of the people team and people to contact us for support if they need it. But actually when you click on this, just to demo the kinds of things that it does, and you can actually play a video within the document itself. Family support, again, we've got all sorts of different support and information here for the rest of your family. So the EAP, again, the Employee Assistance Programme, entitles close members of family, some counselling sessions as well, so we've highlighted that there. Some resources for fathers, relationship issues, we've got some bereavement support, dementia awareness, and some information about how to support someone else with their mental health. The next page is work-life balance. We've got loads of different resources on here, all about managing stress and burnout, spotting the signs and what to do. So we've got YouTube videos, podcasts, articles, documents and all sorts. Very last page is a request for feedback. So we'll continually improve and sort out the different things that we publicise via this link according to demand. And actually that's the sort of most interesting thing about this platform is the fact that we get anonymised analytics, which we've never had before. And I can share a little bit of that with you now. So since the, actually that's the 21st of December, sorry about that. Since the hub launched on the 21st of December, we've had 115 visits, and I've got a little breakdown of the number of visits for each page and the most important resource. So we didn't have any of these analytics before, and the data will be really valuable when we're considering new resources and looking at what we're investing in and what our employees are using and what they're interested in seeing on there. It will help us, as I say, review those resources to make sure we're investing in the right things for our employees. And we can identify spikes in usage, which will help us then with any internal comms we might do. So we might highlight, some of the resources that are most useful at the time. And it may also help us with doing employee surveys as well, so we can actually sort of delve into those issues a little bit more to find out, whether we can offer anything else. So that's a really, really quick whistle-stop tour of the platform. So if you've got any questions, Joe and I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, and thank you for that report. Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, sorry.
Your microphone.
There we go. Thanks. Paragraph 17, you've got the new format allows us to change the content and adapt to the needs of employees without needing to develop lengthy additional seasonal wellbeing documents. Am I right in thinking the documents are those which you put on a PDF and send out with emails? Because the content will be exactly the same, won't it? Is that correct? Sorry.
So we found that we were doing an awful lot of content writing from different organisations and trying to bring it together. What the Wellbeing Hub does is actually we can link to those organisations rather than trying to duplicate the work. So it makes it a lot more streamlined for people to access where they need to go for that wellbeing support rather than getting lost in content heavy comms that goes out and then they can't find it again. So that's what we've created this platform to do.
Any other members? Councillor Heather?
Thank you, Chair. Mental health first aiders. I understand what a first aider is, and if somebody cuts themselves, they can go and stick a plaster on it. Is it along the same lines? Is it they just display a bit of empathy and a shoulders to cry on? And that being the case, is it confidential if somebody does disclose they've got a problem?
So mental health first aid is exactly the same as physical first aid, although it's not actually a cut, but it could be anxiety, it could be anything really. So what the job of a mental health first aider is to support the employee and then signpost them into the right support. So obviously we're not medical practitioners, so really is there to be that emotional support, yes, to listen, to understand, and then to signpost into a medical practitioner or the right support like crisis or mind. So it's just there as that person to go to if you don't have someone to talk to or you need that support or that help, really.
Yep.
Thank you. That mental health first aider, have they got a duty, or do they have to report back to their line manager saying, I think somebody's losing the plot?
So it's completely confidential unless there is a risk to the individual, and if there's a risk to the individual then they would contact someone like me in the HR team who would be trained to take that forward.
Thank you. Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chair. It's really about those, you know, particularly with all that's going on that we will be discussing later. I'm sure that the morale in some aspects of the organisation is a bit low, as it is in many councils. What about those people that are not engaging? Is there any way of sort of trying to identify the people that are feeling cynical, sat at home in the spare room, and just to try and engage them a bit more? I can see why your new employees, because when you're new in a job, it's all very exciting. You've chosen to move, usually, from your other job for all sorts of reasons, and you're usually quite enthusiastic. And that does interest me as to how many of those people have joined in the last 12 months of the hits that you're recording, really. Just about how you've tried to engage the cynical.
So, I mean, I'm really proud of our wellbeing offering for new employees and existing employees. We do run a lot more than just a virtual wellbeing hub. We do check-ins, we run virtual coffees, we do different surveys, so we identify if there's isolation issues and where they are, and you know, we try and direct that support into those areas that need it more. Obviously, employees have got line managers as well, and the line managers should be talking to their employees and understanding them personally, especially in a hybrid way as well, and highlighting any specific concerns, because they would be closer to see the behaviour change in individuals if there were concerns. But our offering is vast. It's not just the platform that we're showcasing to you tonight, and I'd be happy to send you some more detail on what else we offer from a wellbeing perspective, because I think we're actually quite leading in that term.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other members of questions? I've got a couple, but okay. I just have a question. It's referring to item 14 on that particular report. I just wondered, with current circumstances, if you've seen any particular increase or demand for the services that you are offering in terms of wellbeing support. In particular, I take note of things like financial wellbeing and family support, you know, thinking the period sort of from pandemic onwards. And the other question I've got, which is sort of linked, is with many of our employees working from home a lot of the time, how easy is it to refer people to this service if they're not necessarily coming into work, sitting next to their colleague and displaying, you know, not necessarily distress, but characteristics that point to certain, you know, problems in their life where they can receive support from us? I just wondered how working from home has made it, is it more difficult, or is it slightly more simple because people are more likely to be honest because they feel more confident speaking privately because they're in their living room? And I guess linked to that also is, how often do we update the information to what is a very changing world? And is there any particular sort of weekly refresher of certain advice? As an example, I recently went to a particular chain of shops, and they had a domestic abuse Ask for Annie service, which I think is a great idea. It's a new initiative. Would we know to make sure that's included in our offering?
Okay, so I might need to come back to you to around some of the questions. I guess to give you a summary of what we do is we research all the time of what's going out there. So I'm part of Mental Health First Aid England. I'm an instructor for them. There's a whole platform full of information, obviously, that they send out around what's the trends, I suppose, around what people are asking for. We certainly link in with other charities as well to understand what trends are coming through. The platform that we've showcased to you tonight will really help with those analytics for us. We couldn't do that before because we didn't know who was clicking on what and who needed what. So it will certainly give us some trend analysis that we'll be able to concentrate on. So if people do need more financial well-being, we will know now. and we will widen our scope around what we offer. But it's a never moving vehicle. So I hope that answers some of your questions.
Yes, and just the working from home, has that been much of an impact?
Would I say working from home? I suppose the well-being, if I'm being really honest, we accelerated the well-being agenda when we went into COVID. So I guess our employees were very used to these check-ins and these virtual coffees and us talking about well-being and being kind and considerate and caring of each other. So I think actually from a culture perspective, that's pretty ingrained in Epping. Although we do upskill our managers as well. So I think we were sitting at 84% of our managers were trained in mental health. So not to be a mental health first aider, but trained into spotting the signs when people needed help or maybe were in crisis. So we have done an awful lot of work around educating people around mental health at Epping.
Thank you. And just in your own experience, I don't want you to give me any details, but are you confident that there are employees within the council that have come into difficulty, used this service and have been able to resolve their matter or manage the matter through this service?
Absolutely.
Brilliant, that's great, thank you. Oh, and Councillor Kane.
Thank you, Chairman. Just really wanted to make an observation. It's got to be some 35 odd years since I was actually employed by anybody, and I find it extraordinary the level and depth of support that we offer our employees. I just wondered if the officers had any comment as to, are we playing catch up with people or organisations of a similar size? Are we ahead of the game? Are we about standard? Because obviously this is part and parcel of the package that people expect these days, so it is to be valued by prospective employees. So I just wondered where we stood in the league, as it were.
I can answer that, Councillor Kane. I'm pretty confident we're ahead of the game. I say that because we're approached by other councils to share our offering. And I actually think we're pretty close around being able to put this forward for an award as well, especially with the digital offering and people being able to get access to what they need when they need it 24/7. And that's our ethos, really. There shouldn't be any time scales or time delays on people being able to access that support. And it shouldn't take a person to direct someone into that crisis support should they need it immediately. So I hope that answers your question, Councillor Kane.
Andrew would like to come in here as well.
I think more of an observation than anything else. I think there are some good examples out there in the private sector, if I'm honest with you. I mean, so some very good big corporate organisations who take it very seriously, and then there are probably some examples other, and not naming names, but Twitter maybe as an example of an organisation that went completely the opposite direction. I'd say though that in the public sector there is an expectation, I think, that we do it properly and we lead the way and we show how it should be done, and that we take employee welfare very seriously, really, as an organisation. But I am proud of the offer that we make to our employees, and I think we do a good job in that regard. And as I say, I think we do genuinely look after our employees' well-being and are concerned about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members? No, okay. Well, Councillor Lyon.
It works. Thank you, Chairman. Just a sort of an observation, do we know if there's any impact on staff retention or churn as a result of these measures?
The measures of mental health or of the whole, we closely measure retention, yeah. So, and that's part of the new people strategy, to really understand and get to grips with retention and why people leave us. So it's definitely something we'll be looking into in more depth, but we have got analytics around retention.
Thank you. Any other members? Well, thank you very much for both of your presentations, and particularly thank you for coming to the Chamber, but also for making them so engaging. And please pass on this committee's thanks to your team for what is clearly a very, very important piece of resource for our employees here. So thank you very much. And you're welcome to stay, but you're also welcome to leave. Okay, members, moving on now to item 8A. And we are going to go to Chris from our finance team. And this is, members, just to make you aware, this is part of the supplementary agenda.
Okay, thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. Item 8A then, which is included on your supplementary agenda this evening, appearing on pages 3 to 19. The budget monitoring report sets out the Q3 position for 22-23. In other words, the forecast outturn for this, the 22-23 financial year, based on available information as at the 31st of December 2022. The report covers the revenue and capital positions for both the General Fund and the Housing Revenue Account. As with Q1 and Q2, Epping Forest District Council has continued to experience the same financial challenges as other local authorities in Q3, as it tries to manage the local impact of the ongoing global economic crisis. Page 5, including Appendix A on page 17, shows that a number of quite substantial financial pressures are being experienced, which are driving a forecast general fund revenue overspend of £1.313 million as at the end of December. This is, of course, a very similar picture to both Q1 and Q2, quite unusual for it to be so stable, in fact, which is unfortunately not stable in the positive sense of the word on this occasion. But and the big issues remain the same. Some of the numbers have moved slightly, but both up and down. As explained in paragraph 2.4 on page 7, spiralling inflation is continuing to impact, especially on staffing costs in particular. As mentioned in Q1 and Q2, the original budget assumption of a 2% pay award for staff for 22-23. However, as members will know, inflation has increased pay expectations across the private and public sector, and the Council is no different. And as reported in Q2, a fixed sum pay settlement of £1,925 and for all pay grades was eventually reached in for 22-23, which equates to an average increase of around 5% for employees. This is expected to cost up to a further £800,000, including on costs. However, there remain a number of temporary staff savings, many due to vacancies that are broadly offsetting the pressure, which helps in the short term. Although the cost pressure on staff is being generally contained for now, there are some other substantial pressures that are driving the overspend, with the delayed implementation of the local plan being the common denominator in two cases. Thus, as presented in paragraph 2.2 on page 5, the delay continues to affect income from planning applications, with a budget shortfall of £702,000 now anticipated within the Directorate. And now larger in terms of magnitude is the anticipated income from Qualis, which is 1.19 million off track, as planning delays have hampered progress on a number of key development sites. This is slowing down the drawdown of EFDC loans to Qualis, with cash flow requirements not as large as originally expected, for now anyway. Paragraph 2.2 also explains a range of other smaller budget pressures within commercial and technical services, which are combining to drive a projected net overspend of £308,000. Most notable is the anticipated shortfall of £319,000 from the leisure management contract fee, which is driven by an anticipated negative energy cost adjustment of £528,000. The overall position would have been worse were it not for a notable positive variance on recycling, which is driven by an anticipated surplus of 520,000 on income received from the sale of recyclable materials due to a substantial increase in market rates. And finally, on paragraph 2.2, as reported to the Audit and Governance Committee, in common with most councils nationally, this council continues to be negatively affected by the ongoing delays with the external audit of the 2021 and 21-22 accounts, which is a major factor behind a projected overspend of 138,000 on finance and audit. Paragraph 2.3 also highlights some positive news, with significant budget underspends forecast for corporate services, community and wellbeing, strategy delivery and performance, and HRA recharges. Further details on all other significant variances are presented in paragraphs 2.2 to 2.6, and if the forecast is accurate, the deficit would need to be funded from the General Fund Reserve balance, which would leave a year-end balance of 2.96 million as presented in paragraph 3.1. This is below the Council's adopted minimum contingency balance of £4 million. For the sake of completeness, the table in paragraph 3.3, page 9, provides a brief summary of the actual movements on earmarked reserves in the first 9 months of the financial year. As is usually the case, the community projects reserve has seen the highest level of activity. The HRA position is presented in paragraph 4.1 on page 10. An underspend of 5.639 million is anticipated, which is driven by the greatly reduced need to make direct revenue contributions to capital due to slippage on the HRA capital programme. Indeed, no contributions at all are expected to be required now in 22-23 compared to an original budget expectation of 5.4 million. The HRA balance is forecast to end the year at 6.1 million, which is well above the target minimum of £2 million included in the HRA business plan. A reconciliation is presented in paragraph 4.4 on page 11. And very briefly, just to finish off on capital, presented in sections 5 and 6 beginning on page 12, spending on both general fund and HRA capital has continued to be subdued in quarter 3, with the delayed drawdown of Qualis loans, as mentioned previously, being the biggest factor behind a forecast underspend of 103.5 million on the general fund programme, and delays to the house building programme driving a forecast underspend of 32.9 million on the HRA programme. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that. Members, any questions? Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Chair. The general fund, which was 4 million, is now down to 3 million. The reserve, yeah. Are there any plans to put that back to 4 million or some other figure as things get better?
Councillor Phillips raised his hand, but I don't.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. I think that comes into the discussion we'll have on the next item in terms of the budget. There is clearly a desire for us to get back to our minimum balances. However, as members will know, the budget cycle this year has been somewhat challenging. Therefore, we won't be able to get the whole way back in one go, but it's certainly part of the work that we are doing is to move in that general direction. I think it would be wrong for us to try and recover that gap straight away, because that would involve us making other impacts to the services that we offer, and we don't want to do that. So it's a balance going forward, but it's definitely the general direction. And if you remember, when we actually ended up with a better position than we expected to have in the last budget, we were intending to put money back into the budget, into the reserves as a result. That hasn't changed. Mr. Small and I are quite keen to get back to 4 million, but not at the cost of impacting staff or services.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehouse.
Thanks, Chairman. If I could perhaps ask a more general question first, and then I may have a couple more detailed ones. I mean, I think we were given a strong steer at the last Strong Council meeting that a lot of the savings would have to be found from the staffing budget, and we see that in the report in front of us, not all of which I've yet absorbed, given when it came out. And I can imagine it's quite disturbing for staff to go through yet another reorganisation, having gone through lots already. It says several times that an awful lot of the savings come from vacant posts rather than compulsory redundancy, and obviously that's helpful. Yeah. I've leapt ahead a bit then. Okay, well, hold that thought.
I think that's all for the next item. I didn't want to interrupt your flow. This is item 8A, which is to do with the supplementary. Any other questions on that particular matter? And if not, I will move on to the next item. No? Anyone want to add anything to item 8A? Okay, then we will move on to item 9, which is the draft budget report for 23-24. And we have already touched on this, but I think first of all I'd like to just at the start of this item thank officers for everything they have done in order to prepare this report. I know how challenging it has been through following the work of this committee and indeed members of the Cabinet also. And I think it is also worth us pointing out as well that this is a very sensitive matter, particularly for people that are working in the organisation. So if we just bear that in mind when we are referring to matters in the report, as this is a live exercise. And so I will hand over to Chris. Oh, Councillor Phillip, are you taking this first? Or?
If I could just introduce it, because this is the same report that I brought to Cabinet in December. We obviously at that point didn't have the full settlement from the government. That has been factored in. We haven't produced a new report. I'm waiting to hear what comes out of your panel, Chairman, before we produce the final report for our next meeting of Cabinet. I think there is no significant change from the mood music that I've been giving over the past 3 months, in that this is a challenging aspect. There are definite problems that we've had to address. As Councillor Whitehouse, I think, was starting to allude to, some of the savings that we've identified have been through elimination of posts. There is, unfortunately, some reduction in staff, but we're doing that without impacting our frontline services. There is a lot more detail in the late papers that Mr. Small-Hartgrove provided in the supplementary agenda. But the big thing is this is where we're going. We know that there are issues that we have to deal with. We have got a bit of a better settlement from government than we expected when I brought this to Cabinet. But it doesn't make any sense at this stage to slacken back on any of the savings that we've made. It also doesn't make sense, coming to Councillor Hadley's point, to slam all that money into the general reserve, just to have to take it out again. So in discussion with the Finance Department, we're looking to keep that set aside as a special reserve for things that may crop up over the next 12 months that we're going to need to have to deal with.
Thank you, Councillor Phillip. And Chris, did you want to add anything to that and with the report, or we'll go to questions from that point? Okay. Members, any questions on item 9? Councillor Whitehouse.
Apologies for being premature. Yes. I mean, as we heard, a lot, although not all of the savings, come from vacant posts, and that's clearly got advantages in terms of not disrupting existing staff so much and avoiding redundancy costs. It also has that danger that we end up with no staff to do roles which are hard to fill, and continuing issue about how that work gets done or how it's filled. Are we expecting a sort of a reshuffle to fill some of those vacant posts from sort of internal reorganisation, once the process has completed? Are we just holding those posts vacant indefinitely? I mean, picking up, homelessness, for example, where we've taken savings from vacant posts. I mean, clearly, it seems unlikely there'll be a reduction in homeless given current housing issues and so forth. We've heard at previous meetings having to use bed and breakfast and so forth. You know, it seems a sort of area where you can't keep understaffed indefinitely, and it'd be helpful to know a bit more about the approach to which posts are being not funded.
Councillor Phillips indicated.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehouse. It is a very good question, and it wasn't a case of us going through and simply saying that post was vacant, therefore we're going to cut it. For all the savings that we worked through, our approach is very much to look at what each particular area of the organisation was doing, and that was done by the cabinet member responsible and the lead officers in the area. From that, they were then identifying which areas they actually made sense to have a reduction in staff. If that lined up with the vacant post, that was better. But it was all about making sure that we could continue to deliver the services that we needed to. And just because a post happened to be vacant at that time wasn't a reason for cutting it. So we did it, what I would like to think is the right way round, which is say, is the role something that we need to have? Do we need 2 of them? Do we need 3 of them? And then work out what the savings we could do from that. An example I'm sure I've used before, and I'm sure I will use again, is that we got rid of our yoga advisor post. Now, that was a vacant post. I'm not quite sure why we still had it on the establishment, but we did. And by getting rid of that, we actually make a saving. So that's the approach we're taking. We looked at it and said, is a yoga administrator the right thing that we need to have at this stage in the council? And the answer was no. And that was just the way we went through it. We went through it looking at what needed to be delivered, and from that, working out whether it was things that could be cut, things that should be cut, or things that should not be cut. And once we categorised them into those various levels, it allowed us to see the ones that we definitely were going to do, the ones we could do if we had to do, and the ones that it didn't matter what we were doing, we still had to have them to keep offering the service. So hopefully that gives you some reassurance that we actually were doing this in the right direction.
Thank you. Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Chairman. Then I presume we must have been overstaffed beforehand.
That's a very pejorative term, Councillor Hadley. I think there were posts in the establishment that if we'd had sufficient financial pressures before, might well not have been there when we did this. It's perhaps something that should have been done over the past 10 years, looking at various things, deciding whether these still needed to go. We have been fortunate in that we've been a very well-run, financially well-run council, which has meant that we haven't had that degree of pressure. And quite often, without a degree of pressure, you don't look as closely at various things as you would otherwise. I think the other thing to say is that I look at this very much in terms of the positions and roles that we're looking at, but we mustn't forget that there are people involved in this. So we need to be making decisions on whether the role needs to be there or not. If it's occupied by somebody, that impacts somebody. This is the time that we need to take that through. As originally said, a lot of these posts were vacant already, so overstaffing might be in terms of establishment, much more than in terms of actually people in seats. And that's probably shown through the past couple of years when we've been doing budget outturns, and you'll see that in terms of the expenditure and staff salaries, we tended to come in under budget, and that's probably flagged up by the fact that there were posts that we were funding in the budget that weren't actually being filled because they were unnecessary. And I think I'd look at it that way rather than saying that we're overstaffed.
Councillor Hadley.
I just got back. Are we planning to move forward on a more for less basis, as a lot of other big firms do every year?
More for less is an interesting way to put it. It's probably on a par with that horrible phrase of working smarter, not harder. I like to think that in general we're not employing people who are idiots. So people are probably working as hard as they can and as smart as they can. There are always efficiencies that we can put into things. When I took on the finance portfolio, I said that the first budget we brought forward was not great, but that was because we had a new organisation in place and we were putting right things that had been wrong over the past years. What I committed then is what I think I'm doing now, which is bringing forward a budget this year that we've done more work on, we're more confident in, and it's a better budget than it was last year. Is it perfect? No, it's not. Will it ever be perfect? No, it won't. Will there always be things that catch out? Yes, there will. But what we're trying to do, and it's something that Andrew and I talk about quite often, is just making sure that what we do next time is a bit better than we did this time. And that's learning lessons and putting them into practice. So if you put it a different way, can we find things that we can do better? And we can do it perhaps with people in a different organisation? Probably. Exactly what that be, I don't know. I can't know every single item in the council, and that's why when we were looking at savings, we did it with the individual cabinet members and the lead officers for that area, because those are the people who actually know what needs to be done, and they can see how they can evolve it. One of the areas that I can speak about is in terms of some of the revenues and benefits work that's done, and when we were looking at savings around that, there are evolutions that we can do in some of the schemes that we have there to make them more efficient to run, to make them simpler to run, which means that it needs less administration. And if you're spending less on the administration of those, we can actually streamline things. So if that answers your question, then that is the direction we're going.
Constant review of the situation, basically.
I think Andrew would like to also...
Can I just... I've said all along that this is a difficult budget, so to get to the balanced budget that we have here, I think we're doing really well. That said, and I know the leader from his position on Essex County Council will say exactly the same. We've gone through a tough one this year. We both expect next year's budget to be at least as tough to get it. Not least because we've already squeezed a chunk of the savings out, and there's not going to be more money around next year. If anything, there'll be less because inflation won't go down a lot. So we can't stop doing this. But again, it comes back to what I was saying. Each year we're trying to do things better. We're learning from what we've done. So you'll see that iterative process.
Andrew?
Mainly to echo, I think, what the portfolio holder has already said. So we're not a static organisation. We recognise that we're on a journey and we need to continually invest in transformation and change and efficiency. I think we're all duty bound to find efficiency in our processes where it exists, and that some changes, facilitate further changes the following year. So we are benefiting from and capturing some of that efficiency journey as well, and that's, I think, central to a large part of the savings that we're looking to generate as an organisation, because efficiency means that we can deliver a better service for less money, and that has to be probably our first objective. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Brooks.
Firstly, thank you to all the people, elected members and officers particularly, for the level of detail they've already got into on this budget, because it is, not just a difficult atmosphere, but climate rather, but there's tremendous detail. And on that regard, because even in Loughton there is a rumour mill, yes, no, people do stop you in the street. Recently, with regard to slimming down areas where we feel we can save money, and I know that you're hoping to avoid compulsory redundancies, but for those areas that we're hoping to make voluntary redundancies, if we have looked at areas that we're going to save money, have you any idea how many staff less we might be looking at next year?
Not really. it's a relatively small number, as highlighted already. The vast majority of places that are going are currently empty posts. Clearly, we also, as an organisation whose age profile turns to be on the higher level rather than the lower level, people will retire, for example. Clearly, if we can avoid all redundancies, that would be the best. I don't suspect we can. How many will be voluntary? Well, hopefully all of them that will be. But that may not be the case, because there may be places that we need to lose staff. We don't have somewhere for those staff to go, and they don't want to go. And in that point, that will have to become a compulsory redundancy, because again, I'll stress, it's not the person who's redundant, it's the role that's redundant. But obviously we'll do everything we can to make sure that that's as small a number as possible, consistent with the savings that we're doing. I mean, quite a lot of the savings we put in and got in places were not directly a result of getting rid of posts or getting rid of people.
I think Andrew would like to just come in there as well. And then...
I can say that there in total there are 18 roles that are currently occupied that are involved in the overall budget package. That means a consultation with, I think, up to 48 staff are involved in a consultation exercise, because the people doing a generic role, so we need to work out. But as Councillor Phillips says, the actual number of staff that leave the organisation ultimately as a result of that exercise, that do so against their will, should we say, or compulsory, will be a much smaller number than that, and we will use voluntary, but before that we'll use redeployment as well. So I anticipate that the total number of staff that we lose through compulsory redundancy will be a much smaller number than that.
Any other members on this point? Councillor Whitehouse?
Yeah, I just want to understand a bit more some of the proposals which are set out in attachment 2. By the way, I do welcome the reduction in external legal fees. That always seems to be putting in external lawyers an awful lot in recent years. Yeah, the master planning budget is a big saving. I mean, I'd perhaps naively thought that most of the master planning costs sort of fell to the developers, but clearly we need to make sure that we've got the professional expertise to scrutinise those master plans and to push the developers to meet the requirements of the local plan or policies, and not just what fits them best. And I'd like to understand a bit more about what that 101,000 represents in practice. Bit concerned by the voluntary organisations cut, which I think means we've cut that budget twice in a row, and we do seem to increasingly look into the voluntary sector to actually pick up some of the slack from the cost of living crisis and other pressures people are under. And I was going to ask about the community programmes. To what extent did we look at opportunities for income generation before we decided that the more efficient thing was to shut them down?
Councillor Phillips?
So I'm going to look to my cabinet colleagues for some of those. I was wondering if Councillor Bedford could talk about the master planning.
Well, master planning is obviously complete at the moment for various things, and the one we're looking forward to coming forward is Latin Priory. Is there anything else that you wanted?
The question was essentially how come we've reduced the amount of money that we need to spend on master planning by about 100,000.
No, can't possibly comment on that without officers giving the correct information. I'd hate to mislead anybody.
In terms of the grants and the community programmes, when we were, so let's take the community programmes first, when we were looking at the savings that we're looking at, it was very clear to both cabinet members and to officers that that wasn't a case of let's have a reduction in the spending. it was a direction to look both at possible revenue generation and the savings on that to give a balance to it. So the approach there with the community programs is very much looking at what they could actually do, and that's where they came to. Grants would prefer to be in a situation where people don't need grants, but unfortunately we're in a position where we have an amount of money, and I can't genuinely put my hand to the heart and say I would rather increase the grants that we give to an external organisation and lose another member of staff. And that was the sort of discussions that we had to get to in terms of where we're going. It's not ideal, but it's where we had to get to.
Councillor Holly Whitroad.
Thank you, Chairman. And just to add to Councillor Phillips' comments, which he answered very well, and whilst grants isn't directly in my portfolio, I have been involved in some of the service level agreement discussions. In terms of some of those bigger agreements, sometimes it's actually about driving better value. So, for example, the gardening maintenance grants that we do through housing, we've been having discussions with Voluntary Action, Epping Forest, about how we can make things work better both for our tenants and for them. So sometimes it's looking at different structures. For example, not wanting to go into a specific example in too much detail, Voluntary Action now work almost entirely from home rather than from an office. So that might change the amount that is required from us. Also, there's kind of reform in terms of the structure of CVSs. So this is something that's being reviewed at a county level and looking more at kind of quadrant CVSs, so working across Uttlesford, Harlow and Epping Forest to provide an overall better service. But what I would say is, particularly when I was looking at grants, we did sometimes consider where grants might have been coming in, which might not have been appropriate for us as a council to fund. For example, we were getting many grants in from churches, and we had a look around the policy to see if that was the best place for grant funding to go. As I say, it's not my portfolio, but I thought I'd just add to John Phillips' comments a little. Thank you.
And if I can come back on the master planning budget and sort of looking at a bit more detail. Yes, part of what you're actually looking at there is the money that it's what it's costing us from the master planning. So they're trying to drive that down and actually get more contributions in from the people who are actually running those master planning. It's also to do with the fact that hopefully by the time we hit the financial year next year, we will have an adopted local plan so we can actually move things forward in a better way.
Thank you. I think it's probably fair to say that, you know, all options of efficiencies are exhausted, and that some of the matters we've mentioned are very much a last resort. And I think, if anything, this has been a very useful exercise, probably to many Cabinet members going forwards. I just had a question just in relation to sort of sharing services with other local authorities and in generally speaking, if there's been much progress on that. I know there's been lots of discussions, and in particular, have those reached any particular good examples of where good savings have been reached?
There's nothing in this particular year that we're currently in that's deliverable on that. As you know, we already share, for example, our monitoring officer between a couple of us and a couple of other councils. Certainly, as we went through the savings and we were looking at, for example, at internal audit, and I will revert to my own portfolio at places like this because I obviously know it better than some of the others. One of the ways that we're looking to save on that was by working with and other external organisations. Whether we go that route or whether we do the savings in a different way, that's one of that goes into the more detail of how we actually implement it. So yes, we are looking at it. Are there opportunities? Absolutely. Are there ways that we can do things with other places? Absolutely. That often is quite a commercial discussion. So I wouldn't want to have it here, but it's something that we are aware of. I know that the leadership team of the council is looking at it from an officer point of view, and I know our own leader looks at areas that can generate those sort of synchronicities as we go forward. And as we take things forward, there are particularly, I guess, if we've got services that are failing significantly, those might be good examples to look to work with other people on.
Yeah, I
think what I'm
I
talking about.
feel slightly inspired by the previous items. We obviously have an exceptional employee wellbeing programme, and if other authorities are looking to us at what we're doing, is there a revenue opportunity there? Because effectively lots of that information may be similar. As an example of I guess my point I think I'm making is that we are obviously an exceptional authority when it comes to lots of our service delivery, and if people are looking to us, is there a way of almost packaging it and selling it?
I think one of the challenges that we have with things like that is that for another authority to pick up something from us, they have to be convinced that doing it significantly worse than we are. We may know that, but they have to come to the belief that that is actually the case before they're willing to pay us to do things for them.
Understood, thank you. Councillor Brooks.
Thank you for letting me ask another question. I think this is the right time to ask it. I think it's just page 15 on the supplementary paper. It's just really about the Limes Farm and the Broadway regeneration scheme. Does this, it says it's probably going to be delayed. Certainly, you know, this is something that I know people have mixed feelings about it. I mean, in the Broadway, as in, you know, roofs are leaking and things, so money does need to be spent. But are we now looking at the sort of the next financial year for this project? So it's been a bit delayed.
Councillor Whitbread.
I was going to hand that to Councillor Whitbread, who is the housing portfolio.
I handed it to her for you.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to Councillor Brooks for that question. I'll get an email back to you with specific timings, but what I would say is that Limes Farm and the Broadway, the regeneration works, are still really important to us. What we are doing is a wider stock review, looking at the quality of our stock. We're very mindful of the obligations we have under new government legislation following Grenfell, as you'll be aware, and we have done a lot of work internally to make sure that all of our stock is up to standard or becomes up to standard. So the necessary works are certainly something that we'll be doing. We will be looking across our stock to see where the priorities need to be, but I'll certainly be in touch with further details on that specific scheme. Thank you.
I was also going to come back because Councillor Brooks specifically referenced page 15 in the supplementary. Now, page 15 in the supplementary is actually part of the Q3 budget outturn. So, unlike Councillor Whitehouse, who went early, Councillor Brooks has got a bit late. I think essentially what that's saying is that because of where we are in terms of how the project's running, we're not going to spend all of that money in this financial year. So the 0.7 moves forward into next financial year because it's going to run and straddle both of them. So it's not really a delay. We are where we are with the implementation of that, but we don't expect to be, when we first set the budget, we expected we might be able to complete it within the year. Now we know we won't. That bit of the budget just moves into to be spent next year rather than this year.
Councillor Lyon.
Works. Yeah, I was going to comment on Limes Farm, and I was at a meeting last week with the contractors, and that is progressing as was considered. So that, in terms of doing a complete refurb, is going on. It may have slipped, as Councillor Phillips said, because things haven't moved forward as fast as they were planned, but it is happening as scheduled, and the work is starting, I think, in the middle of the month, middle of January, maybe end of January. So, yes.
Councillor Heather.
Thank you, Chair. This is probably directed at the housing portfolio holder. You were saying that you're ensuring that all our stock is up to the mark, and yet we're saving 23,500 on planned maintenance. So, if it was planned and scheduled, why can we shift it along, or does everything now move back a year?
Thank you, Councillor Heather. Thank you, Chairman. As Councillor Phillip outlined, there are some delays, but it's very much work that we are going to do. I'm going to go and speak with officers and just double check on the extent of that delay, but both Limes Farm and Broadway, which have been identified in that report, will certainly be looked at, and we'll be doing a wider stock review to really understand the priorities, because there are certain repairs that we have to do, and they have to be the priority. And actually, what we have looked kind of at post-pandemic is a lot of the nice to have. So we did a lot of work on really improving kind of outdoor spaces in our estates. And what I've instructed officers to do, and we're looking at, is the more kind of back to basics approach. So really tidying up our outdoor bin spaces, but also the really important things like making sure roofs aren't leaking. So that's why we're doing the wider stock review. But as I say, I'll get back to you at the exact detail. But Councillor Phillip is right to highlight that it's not a big delay, and as Councillor Lyons said, they are on site in Limes Farm, and I think a press release came out last week. Thank you.
Councillor Phillip.
I would just remind Councillor Heather of the review of the 30-year HRA business plan where it's flagged up that because we can only put rents up by 7% rather than the cost of inflation, which is going to hit a number of things, that does have a pressure on what can actually be done within that plan. And we went through this as well. I'm sure the leader remembers it, but I can't remember exactly how long ago. It was a number of years ago when we actually looked at what we were doing in terms of our planned maintenance and whether that planned maintenance needed to be run at the level it was. Because certainly for some of it, it was replacing things because a timer had gone off, not because they needed to go off. And actually replacing things significantly more quickly than you or I who own our own homes would do. For example, a new bathroom every 10 years or a new kitchen every 15 years. Now, my wife might like a new kitchen. It's not quite 15 years yet, but I'm quite happy with it. But the point is what the planned maintenance programme had to get into, and it freed up a bit, and now I think we need to, because of the pressure on the housing revenue account, focus it down again, is doing the things that need to be done when they need to be done, not doing them just because it's 10 years or 15 years or whatever since the last time. Clearly, if it's something on a safety aspect, like gas safe checking, etc., that needs to be done on a schedule, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that will require a new boiler, for example. So we can actually make savings by not doing more than we have to do.
Councillor Holly-Whitbread.
Thank you, Chairman, and that's a good point by Councillor Phillip. Although what I would say, and I think members should be mindful of, is the new obligations we have under the social housing regulator, which have changed and actually mean we're having to check things a lot more often and are having to really tighten up our internal processes. So Councillor Phillip is certainly right. Not having a kitchen every 10 years just for the sake of it is certainly the right thing to do, and certainly in terms of finance is the right thing to do. But we do have much stricter obligations in terms of ensuring our stock is up to standard.
And I think, can I just ask probably on this point, Councillor Heather's just sort of highlighted really, is that, of course, we have the opportunity to ask these questions in a lot of detail, but perhaps to certain residents, perhaps that are impacted directly, they may read this in a different way. So I just wanted to know what sort of comms, obviously there's the full democratic process through scrutiny and other forms, but what sort of communication are we having directly with residents, just to make that clear? Because the points that have been made tonight are absolutely fair and pragmatic, but that may not reach the doorsteps.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, Councillor Phillip. We do have regular consultation with our tenants, so there's different residents and tenants groups across Epping Forest in all of our estates. There's also our relationship with Wynne, who actually comes along to the Community Select Committee and also facilitates committees with our tenants. We have a regular publication that goes out to tenants as well, and we will go through the consultation with tenants on kind of key changes to legislation.
Thank you. And I don't want to delve too much into the work of the other committees with that question, but I thought it was important that we heard that. Councillor Brooks.
Just to make a point that is related to what Councillor Whitbread said, that I feel was, again, a time-consuming exercise, but very important. When we were building Santa's Grotto, when I popped into the back office, the staff were working very hard on a survey that they were doing, updating, making sure our records on tenancy and all sorts of other things, and who was actually occupying the property. And this is very time-consuming, but actually it's really important from a legal and a safety point of view. And also, I must say, the housing news, the last one, was very good. Now, people may choose not to read it, but a lot of effort has gone into that communication with our tenants.
Thank you, Councillor. Did Santa enjoy his stay now? Any other members? Councillor Whitbread.
Sorry, I won't go on too much, but I was delighted that we could have Santa come and visit in Debden. That was really good to see. But just to say that Housing News publication, the team did put a lot of work into that. And I think what I'm trying to re-establish is the democratic link. So the cabinet member or the relevant portfolio holder used to write a column. So we have reintroduced that. And just to note, when Deborah Fenton was here during lockdown, we did do tenant webinars. Unfortunately, they weren't quite as well attended as we would hope, but we are replicating that in person now that things have got back to normal.
Any other members? Councillor Hadley, do you? Oh, sorry. Any other? Councillor Lyon.
Yeah, I can comment again on Lyons Farm. There's been regular dialogue with tenants and leaseholders on a month-by-month basis, and the meeting that I attended last week, there must have been 50 to 100 residents there talking with the contractors and explaining exactly what developments were going to go on and their support packages that were in place, and so much so that the contractor was suggesting that they might actually put in place certain things like planters or something like that to actually assist in the local area. So that there is regular consultation with housing officers and with the contractors in these cases.
So we conclude really that it's really up to certain residents to actually engage themselves. The communication is very much there, so that's really good to hear. Any other members on this item? No? Okay, well then if we're happy, we'll move on to item 9, which is dates for future meetings, and the committee should note that the next date of this committee will be the 21st of February 2023, and it's now coming up to 8:30, and I will declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much.